think I totally jacked that lens up on my camera on that last shot. I'm not a very good camera owner. Yo, it's going to be another fab heavy week in the shop. I have a ton of work to do on this thing if I really think I'm going to drive it to Vegas for the SEMA show. I have so much to do, but without a crazy deadline, these things don't get finished. At least in my shop, they don't. I always work better when there's some ridiculous deadline to meet. And right now I have just over 2 weeks. I don't know, just over 2 weeks in order to get this thing done, which totally seems doable, but it's not going to happen unless I stay busy. You can see I didn't put the toolboxes away. I haven't done a lot of things in the shop. I just barely got that Jeep finished up, and it's just chaos. But I got to keep the hustle. I got to keep the fire alive, you know what I mean? So right now we're going to keep working on the bed. I made good progress on this thing last week, getting some more welding done on it and stuff, and those braces in the inner fender wells. So I want to keep that momentum and start building a framework right here for the suspension so that I can put a panel in there if I want to haul stuff and be able to pull that panel out if I want to show off the suspension work. So it's time to start chopping up some angle iron and build a framework for this. It should be pretty neat looking when it's done and make this like super ultra lowered truck actually pretty usable. I've also got some other tricks with a roll pin for the rear where the bumper would have been on this thing originally. I need to fit the tailgate. I need to get in here and just kind of button up everything on this bed. Once that's done, then we can tackle air system, shocks, and a bunch of that stuff that's under the hood that still needs done. All right, I need to keep things kind of simple just to keep this thing moving along quickly. Basically, what I'm going to do is build a framework out of angle iron here, so that we create a spot to drop a piece of plywood in or a section of the old bed floor. So what I need to do is come up with the size that I need and just create a simple box basically over on the bench. 41 3/4, and then the width here. I cut this big because there was like a brace right here that I couldn't keep the whole brace. But I don't know, I'm not really stoked on how much space is here, so I want to kind of fudge that a little bit when it's all said and done. But back here I need a little bit more space than it has because I want to try and fit a shock in there. So let's say I make this hole 16, I scoot it back this way just a little bit. No, that's not enough. Kind of say I have to make this hole 17. That'll work. 41 3/4 by 17. Let's go make cool stuff. I'm gonna end up needing that table here in a minute, but for now we can work over here. All right, 41 3/4. A little speed square. All right, if I make 2 of those, that should be our front and our back. On this small angle iron stuff, I almost always just cut it with a cutoff wheel. It's just easier than using the chop saw or plasma cutter. All right, I'll make 2 of those and then kind of do the same for the sides, and then we'll weld it all up over on the other fixture table. All right, let's make this thing sort of square. I got some kind of super basic stops set on here. I want to make sure this thing doesn't get too big on the 41-inch side. I also want to make sure that my cuts are like quite a bit over 45. So I've got kind of a big gap here. I want to make sure it doesn't draw in too much. These things always shrink up. I know there's a lot fancier things I could be using this fixture table for, but just these simple shapes, this thing is awesome. Just over an eighth. 45 and just over an eighth. All right, if I'm gonna get any decent welds out of this, I gotta sand a bunch of this paint off. I got a few booger welds on that angle iron frame when I was doing it, and I was like, I gotta slow down, take my time on this stuff a little more. It's a mess. A lot of people would think that you put this in like that, with it being flat on top, but I want to mount it like this so that it's got a channel that drops down in. That way we can like flush in a piece of plywood or a piece of MDF if we want. It'll all make sense in the end, I promise. I've got these chunks of steel that I got somewhere. They should get us just high enough. These should get us just high enough to where the bottom of the panel will clear those air lines. The other thing this will do is give us just a little bit of room to run our shocks up higher in the back, which is going to be good. That way I can get the shock just a little bit taller and still underneath this panel. Let's do some quick measurements here. Top of a ridge to there, 31 7/8. 31 7/8. That's good. All right, that's where that thing is going to live. Now I can go ahead and start making the panels for the front and the back of this thing. And then once that's in, we can like start trimming the excess sheet metal out a little bit. Then it'll start looking like it's supposed to. I cut my strip of sheet metal, and then I went through and I marked about a 1/2 inch back past this line on all the high spots. And I'm going to take my cutoff wheel and cut a slot in the high part of all of these. That way the sheet metal can drop down and like drop into that little channel. That way I get a good weld on it. After it's all said and done, I'll go back and I'll trim the excess sheet metal off the bottom. Trying to get it to drop down in that slot on the edges and then into these cuts along the bed. Let's get close now. We're getting it. We are getting it. There it is. I got it to drop down into that little sort of slot that I made. And now I will come in here and just kind of tack it in a couple spots to kind of get my game plan all together. That looks awesome. I think now I can go through and start tacking the bottom. This piece is really going to be what sort of gives the bed floor its strength back. Sweetness. That's the look I was going for. That's going to be cool. Look at that. It's all coming together now. I'm back in the shop. I ended up finishing welding all that and sanding it down, and now we're back underneath the rig. I want to start doing some of the fab work that I've been putting off down here. So let's start with shock mounts. They got to go in here to here somewhere, and they got to have enough travel for that bag to get full compression and extension. So we got kind of a lot of work ahead of us. I'm gonna have to move these doors. I picked up some parts for the orange Jeep truck thing, but they're kind of just in the way right now. Right now we're doing shocks, and I wanted to show you the ones that I'm using. Basically, these are one of my favorite shocks to use for bag jobs. They're the Monroe Matic 31000s. They compress to like 12, and they extend to right around 19.5, so they have like 7.5 inches of travel, which is really close to what the bags have. So between those, some tabs that I have from Rough Stuff Specialties, and a couple of shock studs that I have out of an old Skyjacker shock box, I should be able to make shock mounts on the back of this thing and try and get them done tonight. All right, I'm gonna start by mocking up the tabs with the sleeve that I'm going to use in them. We'll get 4 of these tabs put together and tightened down so that we have our starting point. I'm using big flat washers on here just to try and keep the tabs as square as can be. I'm also using a big flange nut on there, and hoping that that kind of makes everything super square to each other. Now what we're going to do is I want to find the width that I want these on the rig, and then I'm going to tack them to this little piece of round tubing. I'm going to tack it in a spot that's like really easy to cut it off once it's in the rig. But if I tack it to there and then I go put this whole thing up in there on the cross member that already exists, they'll both be in the exact same angle and plane and everything else. So it should make it to where getting them exactly the same is really easy to do. I'm going to go get my measurement and we'll tack these up. These tabs need to be 36 inches apart, outside of tab to outside of tab. So I marked this little piece of 1/2 inch tubing that I've got here. I've got my bolt going through with my spacer, and I just need to do like a really simple little tack to hold this thing in place. Now in theory these things are like in a really good position to go weld them onto that cross member there, and it'll be really simple to like make sure they're both exactly the same. Drag the welder back over there. Alright, now all we got to do is hold this thing up in place, rotate it up, and tack the thing. There we go. Boom, just like that. And then I'm going to roll it up a bunch. That's part of the key right now, is to get these shocks up high That's going to be great. Heck yeah. We'll just do some pretty minor tacks on this thing right now. And then that way if I got this thing totally in the wrong spot, it's not terrible to undo it. Oh, I got it totally in the wrong spot. I want this thing way higher. All right, I'm cutting those off and we're gonna rotate it up a little bit higher. This is gonna be sick. This is gonna work out really good if I don't screw it up. Cutting these tacks off. I really boogered that up. There we go. I want this thing like way up there. Right there. That's what I want. Let's tack it there instead, because that's way better. See, the goal here is to rotate these shock mounts up kind of as much as I can. That way if they have to hang down off the lower mount a bunch, then they don't hang down below the wheel of like a 15. You don't want it to where your rim hits. You don't want it to where parts of your suspension hit the ground if you get a flat tire. So rotate these up as high as we can, get the lower shock up as high as we can, and then we have options for wheels and stuff that aren't like, you're not just stuck with having to run big rims. All right, that's way better. Whew. Cool, there you can see it from the top. Kind of making sense how we were able to get the angle like the same on both sides by having it tacked to that tube first. So now I can go in here and kind of weld these up a little bit more solid, and then we can take this tube out of here. And then we just have our tabs in place where they belong. And they're all symmetrical. See if this thing will come out without putting up much of a fight. There we go. Awesome. Go put that back on the metal pile. Let's go ahead and weld these things up. Funny, long ago when I did the notch in this, I was trying to keep everything down low so I wouldn't have to put a bump in the floor, and that kind of failed. I've got a bump in the floor, and then I got shocks poking way up past the notch. I could have just done a normal big step notch. Oh well. This isn't the only vehicle I'll ever do. All right, those are in place where they're gonna live. That was pretty easy. Now we just raise this thing up and start figuring out where the lowers are gonna go. All right, next up we gotta figure out if our shocks are gonna measure up. Basically, I'm gonna go center line of that new shock tab down to the bottom of this bracket, and we're right at 20. So that's at full droop. The bag would be extended all the way there. It probably could go a little farther if you absolutely hammered on it, but it's pretty safe that that's full extension. Now I'm gonna go full compression. Just gotta be careful not to lift this thing up off of the lift. Okay, that's full compression. And we are at 13.5. What were we at before, 20? So that's really saying with the shock placement there, we only need a 6.5-inch travel shock. That's easy. All right, let's see what it looks like with a shock in it. That is saying that that needs to be back a little bit. The dust shield up there, it looks like it's hitting the tube if I try and go too far forward. So it would have to come back a little bit. Check this out, I went and dug through my tabs and I got this random one that's not really the right shape, but I'm gonna go ahead and just tack it on here actually. And we'll kind of cycle this and see how the shock is going to work. This is, again, just some random tab left over from some old suspension kit. So I don't feel too bad about using it as a test mule. I also marked right here, it's hard seeing it, but I marked on there where this tube is at full compression. So we should be able to see if we're using all of the shock travel or not. I don't think we are going to. So far it's looking pretty good. Okay, it's starting to get light on the lift. And that is right where these are compressed. The shock still has plenty to go. Check this out. I just did a quick little cardboard template basically with that mount point being a 1/2 inch farther out and a 1/2 inch farther up. And it can be a really simple bracket, and I want to do something that like welds on like that other one does and then comes back and gussets into this side. And check it out, I have this random bent up 3/16 metal that I can totally just cut a piece out of and make a sweet little bracket out of this thing. I'm going to cut 2 chunks out of this thing that are symmetrical and then drill a couple holes, and we'll go weld these onto the rig. Piece of cake. I love it when it comes together like this. Let's move all this stuff out of the way so I can use my chop saw. All right, I got 2 of those pieces cut, and basically this is just a tab, but it's got like a built-in gusset in it, so it should go on there and look pretty simple. I will likely round off the edges on the top side so that it looks a little more professional, but all in all, it's a pretty quick gusseted tab all in one shot, and I can still access the bolt or the nut from the back side there, so that's kind of a win. Got that bracket is it's all drilled out, and then I beveled this edge and I beveled the bottom, and that's so that I can like flush it out here and get a good strong weld even up against that edge. Throw a tack or 2 on it real quick. Let me get the shock out of the way and then we can weld this thing up. If I would have known, I could have like made this link bracket just have this built in with it right out of the gate. But I was building that a long time ago, and I didn't really have a solid game plan of how it was going to end up. All right, I'm back. After much consideration, I am going to try and use the Monroe-matic shocks. I feel like this one is going to gain me about 3/4 of an inch of extra lift. And if I actually notch this top of this dust shield, I can make all of this clear that cross member without having to modify it. So we are going to start by getting the old mirror braid out and notching this out. We'll go test fit it, see how things are looking. Look at that. Just put a perfect little notch in that. I can clean this up with my rotary file, paint it. I was going to paint the shocks anyways, and I think we're going to be good to go. That was easy. Okay, we have the shock with the little notch cut out of it to make clearance for that tube up there. And let's throw some bolts in here and cycle it and see if this is the cure. Come on. Throw this lower on that shock stud. So we do have clearance still on full droop, which is good. Now let's check full compression. Right here's where it starts rolling forward just a little bit. There it is. The shocks are at full compression and we have clearance. That's a success. Dig it. All right, we just fixed a problem without having to do a whole ton of changing. Everything's clear. All right, the shocks seem pretty well sorted out. I threw them back in there just so they can hold the axle in place. Now we can lower this thing down and start slotting the holes for the airbags. Basically what we've got is the holes for the bags are really close to this tube, and if you think about it, when it's at full compression, the bag is all over that tube. I can scoot this thing forward a little bit and center it more in this plate so that it's not crammed all the way into that one, and it should help fix a problem at full compression. At full extension, the bag's going to be like twisted back just a tiny bit like that, which isn't a big deal. They can handle quite a bit of deflection. But at full compression, this axle comes up and it kind of rolls forward and it pivots up. So if I have the top forward a little bit, it should help the lower bellow from rubbing as hard as it was on that lower mount as well. So let's do that. I'm a little bummed because I don't like the look of having slotted holes up here, but if I take my time and I drill these things right, slot the holes nice, it shouldn't look too butchered. Yay! I think we're going to be good after this as far as the bag mounts go. I think this is part of the problem with me just being out of my groove and like not just doing this job until it was done. I just kind of come and pick away at it here and there every now and then, and I never really get fully in the groove and like comfortable with any of these parts of the job. All right, here we go. Now we can try and fix this. I'm gonna see if I can just continue this slot with the grinder. See if I can take that material out. That looks pretty good. Pretty cool little shot of the process. And then the end result. Not bad. I don't love it, but it's not making me want to cut the thing off and start over, so that's good. I'm going to go ahead and finish cutting the centers out of those and slotting them and grinding them, and then we'll fit some bags in there. All right, here's what we were looking for. The bag isn't really folded over itself too hard. It's not pushing on this cross member too bad. Before it was really sort of folded back, and now it's just kind of compressing how it's supposed to, I guess. And things look like quite a bit better. That's a win. The shock's not hitting the cross member up here. We got plenty of travel. We got plenty of compression. Everything's good to go. All right, since all that stuff, the suspension is kind of dialed in, now it's time to actually start throwing parts under here. I think what I really need to get done is basically I need compressors, manifold valve, air tank, and then I actually have this charcoal canister for the evap system that has to get down here. The goal is to kind of keep the compressors and the manifold valve sort of forward in here so that if I do have a problem with any of it, it is close to the hole in the bed so that I can get in there and work on it. So I got to figure out how to mount those three items here, 2 compressors and manifold, and then behind that I want to mount the air tank, and then I can do the charcoal canister wherever it fits. All right, this is roughly the layout or the space that I have. There's a cross member in the bed that I need to be clearing here, and then the differential will be here. So in order to start this box project, I'm going to make a box that is 15 inches front to back, and then wide it's going to be 41. So that should be perfect. The 41 is wider than this needs to be, but it should get us right up to the frame rails clean and easy. And that 15 will allow me to land right under here so I can bolt down to that tab, and it should keep things pretty simple. Clean and simple is the point right here. So let's go cut up some parts. 41 by 15, 41 by 15. I think we're pretty good here. A little over 15, a little over 15. Right about 41, good to go. I'll throw a couple more tacks in it, and then I can kind of move it around and weld it and finish it up. That's cool. It's like a thing. Simple and easy and shouldn't have a bunch of spots to rust. Let me grab my welding helmet and we'll buzz this thing in. Oh man. Man, it wasn't very heavy until it had all the parts on it. Here we go. Let's start kind of figuring out how this thing's gonna fit. I hope I got all my measurements right for this air tank to like clear this cross member up here. Yeah, it goes right up in there. There we go. Man, that's rad. It fits way up in there tight. Dig it. It's not the prettiest thing, but it's gonna work great. Here's kind of the shot from the side. It doesn't hang down nearly as far below the frame as I was expecting it would have to be. We got plenty of clearance between the differential and the rack. It could actually go forward a little bit, and from the back you don't even see the thing. I mean, you don't see it hardly at all, even as it is, let alone when I put a roll pan in here and fill that void in. This thing's going to be pretty stealth. Check this out. I am making the brackets right now that are actually going to weld to the frame, and they're going to bolt to this framework that I've got here. So this is just 2x1 C-channel, and I'm doing a hole in it and a hole in the bracket. Those will get bolted together with 3/8 bolts. This will get welded to the frame, and it should hold everything right in the right spot. Bolt these together in 4 spots. We'll go jack it up, and it should rest right on the frame rails. Buzz those on, and then the whole thing should be able to just come out when it has to and stay in there and be strong when it needs to. 9 5/8 to the outside. 9 5/8 to the outside. I don't think it's going to get any more square than that. Let's tack this thing in. Alright, we'll see you guys tomorrow. I got to finish welding this up and then go grab one of my kids from their friend's house. I'm back in the shop. This thing, the tank mount, I'm actually pretty stoked on how all that came out. Today I want to try and button up whatever fab work I really need on the back portion of the rig here. And one of those things I want to do is finish the exhaust and tailpipe. So I ran through my pile of exhaust tubing and I had a pretty good couple of pieces here, and I think we can make most of it happen. I also ran over to my friend Dan's house and picked up some flanges and a gasket, and I want to do that because I'm going to run the exhaust underneath the axle and under part of this tank mount. So I want to make sure if I have to drop any of this, I can unbolt the tailpipe, and the flange at the muffler there will allow me to do so. So this thing actually has like pretty good exhaust on it now. When I first started building it, I went ahead and I shortened the downpipe so that it's up above the frame rails and did new piping to a new catalytic converter. And it goes all the way to this turbo muffler, which is just a 3-chamber like fiberglass packed muffler. Pretty cheap, but it sounds good. And then now I just need to do the tailpipe, and I wanted to wait until I had all my suspension and air stuff in place before I did that. So let's get busy and see how this goes. Where would you be if you were a welding helmet? The flange and the amount of stick out on that pipe turned out pretty good. So I think I'll use the gasket in there again because the gasket's got small bolt holes in it, and they actually kind of help line all 3 of these things up together. We'll get this thing kind of mocked back together, and then we can tack the next piece on, the piece after that, and hopefully kind of button this tailpipe up in the quickness. We've got that together, and I actually had cut this piece of 2 1/4 already. I'm just gonna kind of have it aiming right about here, but I kind of need to flare this thing out first. I think that's my jam right there. So I'm gonna mark it. I'm gonna mark this, and then I'm gonna cut it, and then I'm gonna flare it, but I'm gonna flare it without any fancy tools. I'll show you how that goes. I just marked the tube kind of close to the angle that I want to cut it at, and we'll throw it in the chop saw. I'm going to work around it with my channel locks and just kind of build a bell on the end of it. You got to remember, I'm going from 2 1/4 to 2 1/2, right? So that's only a 1/4 inch of difference, which means each side of this pipe only needs to be an 1/8 inch bigger. You don't want to overdo it. Not show car clean, but building a mini truck in your garage clean for sure. Yeah, you could build like some fancy tool to put in your press and flare that out, or you could just grab your vice grips and make it happen right now. I think I'll weld a couple little heavier spots on this, and we can go ahead and build the rest. and then take it apart one final time and weld it all up. Oh, that's like perfect right there. Let's drag this tranny jack over here and have it help support things for a second. All right, let me move my ground to the frame. So here's that little strap bracket that I got. This has got to be a $3 auto parts store thing. Definitely pretty low buck. And then this would have been part of a metal bracket that would go with it. I'll go ahead and bolt the two of these things together, just so they're at their happy spot. This isn't perfect, but nothing up to this point has been, so let's just keep pushing forward. That will work just fine. We'll get that tacked. We're just gonna weld this thing on. Gotta move my ground. Cool, we almost have a full tailpipe. This is pretty cool. Oh, no wonder that angle was wrong over there. This was the end that was supposed to go up against that. I had already started kind of figuring this stuff out, and I was like, I knew I cut an angle into that that would have matched. Oops. All right, let's go find a turn down. I want to get the exhaust to kind of come over and flush out in this area over here. I think I'll try and make this portion work. I'll probably use this. I'll probably use this as my turn down into the corner, and then this part will go up to that tailpipe that we already have there. So let me kind of chop on it a little bit, hopefully keep it long, and then figure out exactly what we're doing. I think this is going to be my turn down though. I killed another battery in the camera, and while I was doing that, I actually chopped this and got my angle right on it. I feel pretty good about this. It's going to kind of get the exhaust to drop down just before the roll pan that it's going to get. So it should be good. It won't drag on the ground, and we should be able to get it to exit out without like ruining bodywork and stuff that I've got going on back here eventually. I'm stoked. I love doing quick, not having to leave the house much to do it, exhaust work. I can't take it. I gotta make this thing flush. That's way better. Heck yeah, check that out. The exhaust is done. I even went in here and I mounted the charcoal canister. Like, did all kinds of cool stuff. This thing's really coming together. It's looking busy under here, but at least it's under the bed, not in it. So that's pretty cool. I'm stoked on it. We'll be back the next edge shed. We're gonna be getting this thing, get the bed off of this thing, get the bed totally finished up, and hopefully get the cab going too, because I have a deadline and it's coming up quick. We'll see you guys next week.